Why use open source cloud computing software?
Well, I think it's remarkable that cloud computing and private cloud is a new industry segment, and it's completely dominated by open source. And this shows that when you develop really advanced open source infrastructure software, nothing beats open source. So we have 4 strong projects in just one category, and all of them are ahead of all the closed source offerings in the market. So that in itself is a huge testament to the power of open source, and also the power of the developers and sysadmins who adopt them. They refuse to adopt solutions where they can't look under the hood and see the code.
You're saying the open source is far ahead of proprietary solutions. I'm assuming someone on the other side of the fence would argue with that assumption?
I'm very happy to argue with them, and I will let the customers argue. Go and ask VMware how much they have deployments of their product VCD. For the size of the company, it's minuscule what they've done so far. And it's a good project, so don't take me wrong. I'm not saying they can't get it right. But this is one of the first areas in software where open source is clearly the innovator and in the lead, and it's not just one open source project, it's 4 of them.
Devin, what's your sense of that? Why open source for cloud computing? And we are mainly talking about private cloud, correct, sir?
Yeah, in the context where we're coming from, yeah. And to give a little background there, when we created Nova, which became the compute portion of the OpenStack project in my early days at NASA, the amount of response and rally we got from the community and the amount of rapid growth we saw there, it just told us we were in the right place at the right time, and that there are a number of other open source projects in this space, and they're all relevant and they're all doing well. But if you look at just how fast they're growing, that's just the market and the community speaking to the need there.
Peder, why open source cloud? Is there a relative advantage here? What about cost? I guess I would also ask. What's your sense on cost here?
Happy to cover all of that. So I mean, ultimately, when we started the company, we took a quick look at, effectively what were the most successful clouds that had launched. And 4 years ago, you're looking at the Amazons, the Salesforces, the Yahoos, the Googles, all building up various types of services from the infrastructure layer all the way out through the software as a service layer. And when you really looked at the underpinnings of this stuff, it was based on open source technologies. And that was because they were able to leverage from innovators in various communities. It wasn't just one project, it was a multitude of projects that were kind of helping push this stuff forward. It gave them better control over features, services, and functions that they wanted to go build, and it met the cost needs. You weren't paying the crazy license fees that were associated from the virtualization layer all the way through the operating system layer that enabled them to go build businesses. And if you look at the early days of Amazon even, Amazon wasn't first to market. There were 4 others that joined them almost at the exact same time. Amazon's the only ones left. And that has a lot to do with the economics, the developers, and the ecosystem that built around that. So when we started CloudStack, we knew from the start that in order to manage costs, leverage innovation happening in various communities, and lower the barriers of adoption to the enterprise or service providers. We actually serve both markets on that one, James, and we've seen that open source has taken off both private and public clouds. Open source licensing, open source development models, and that open ecosystem model has proved to be very beneficial to the CloudStack project.
Is there a way, I mean, you did touch on a cost a little there, but is there a way to, roughly quantify if the proprietary solution costs X, then open source is going to be X minus percentage, or is it just too big a vast a question?
You know what I mean? You can break down costs across the board, right? And at the end of the day, the license fees are the absolute minimal. When you're comparing cost of infrastructure, of cooling and building space and administrative costs, all that stuff. That's actually where the costs really come, and it doesn't matter whether it's open source or proprietary at that point. I can easily say that I think all 4 of us have a license that's 1/10 of what VMware might deliver, but it's small in comparison to the other costs. I think it really comes back to control and innovation and leverage, and that's actually what open source brings more. So it's more of an opportunity cost than it is a physical cost, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Gordon, why open source? I mean, leverage, control, cost?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you look back at sort of when Red Hat was getting started, and I think really kind of how open source came onto the market, it was very much about essentially commoditizing proprietary products. Linux did it with Unix. MySQL, for example, did it with Oracle. But I think what we've really seen in the last few years, and this is true of cloud, it's true of big data loosely, is the innovation is happening in open source. I mean, yeah, there's innovation still happening here and there in proprietary products, but is the open source development model and the ability for users, for vendors, for communities of developers to come together that has really made open source so powerful, and it's really just the way increasingly that software is developed and deployed.
Why is open source doing more cutting edge stuff? Is it just the community of developers? I mean, why wouldn't a highly paid team of proprietary developers be able to top that? What is it about the open source that makes it more cutting edge?
Yeah, I'm not stealing someone else's line. I just don't remember off the top of my head who said it. But you can hire smart people if you're a proprietary software company. You can't hire all the smart people. Just the ability, and I'm not going to name specific open source projects here, but
come on, Gordon, why not?
but let's talk about Linux, for example, and kind of stay out of the cloud space. I mean, the number of different developers, different companies, and users, for that matter, not just vendors, who are coming together to solve their own problems is just incredible. And you just don't get that kind of interaction, innovation, increasingly in the proprietary space.